blood, sand, thunder. The roar of 50,000 voices shatters the morning air as sunlight spills into the Colosseum. Beneath its towering arches, men stand in chains, their bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. The scent of sweat and iron fills the air. A trumpet sounds. In that instant, every heartbeat in the arena becomes one. The crowd rises, hungry for violence, demanding blood as proof of power. These men are not heroes. They are slaves, prisoners, the forgotten. Yet for a fleeting moment they are gods. Every clash of steel, every scream, every death, feeds an empire that calls itself eternal. But beneath the marble and glory, beneath the masks of honor and courage, lies something darker. A machine built not only on conquest, but on the spectacle of suffering. This is the story of the men who fought and died to keep Rome entertained. This is the bloody history of the Roman gladiators. 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire ruled the known world. From the deserts of Africa to the misty edges of Britannia, its legions marched beneath the eagle standard, spreading not only conquest but culture, architecture, and power. Yet beneath all its splendor, Rome had a secret addiction. It was not gold or wine or empire that kept its heart beating. It was blood. The gladiatorial games were the empire's grand illusion. To the people, they were a gift, a spectacle to unite rich and poor under the banner of Roman pride. To the emperors, they were a weapon of control, a way to distract restless crowds and glorify imperial might. And to the men who stepped into the arena, they were a sentence, or a chance at redemption written in pain. This was not mere sport. It was ritual, theater, and execution woven together with a precision that only Rome could perfect. The sand of the arena was sacred, a stage where the empire's myths were performed in flesh. Victory meant adoration, defeat meant death, but both were entertainment. Today, the Colosseum stands in silence, its stones eroded by time. Yet the ghosts remain. In its shadow lingers the echo of cheers, the scent of iron, the memory of men who fought to prove their worth in a world that saw them as nothing. This is not just history. It is the story of how civilization itself can turn cruelty into art, and death into spectacle. Long before the roar of Roman crowds and the towering Colosseum, there was silence. The silence of ritual. In the earliest days, before the empire rose from the hills of Italy, the Etruscans, a mysterious civilization that once ruled the north, believed that blood could bridge the world of the living and the dead. When a nobleman died, his soul was thought to wander, restless and hungry. To guide it to peace, men were made to fight before his tomb. These duels were not meant to entertain. They were offerings. Each drop of blood, a sacred gift to the gods of the underworld. But as centuries passed and Rome absorbed the Etruscans, something shifted. The meaning of blood began to change. What was once sacrifice became spectacle. The Romans, practical and ambitious, took the ritual and stripped it of its sanctity. They transformed it into a public show. Death no longer honored the dead. It thrilled the living. By the 3rd century before Christ, these private duels had become organized events sponsored by the wealthy. Aristocrats hosted them to win favor, to display generosity, to remind the people of their power. Crowds gathered in the streets and forums to watch slaves and prisoners fight for their lives. The people cheered, the blood flowed, and the old gods were forgotten. In those moments, Rome discovered something dangerous. The people's hunger for violence was endless, and their loyalty could be bought with spectacle. What began as a funeral rite became a political weapon. Blood no longer sanctified death. It fed an empire that was learning how to rule not just through law and conquest, but through performance. And so, in the dust and ritual of early Rome, the arena was born. Not from faith, but from ambition. Not from reverence, but from control. It was the beginning of an empire's addiction, one that would soon grow into the greatest theater of blood the world had ever seen. In the heart of ancient Rome, rising from the dust and debris of a fallen empire, a new monument began to take shape. It was colossal, unlike anything the world had seen before. The Flavian amphitheater, later known as the Colosseum, was not built merely to entertain. It was constructed to remind the world that Rome could conquer, destroy, and create with the same hand. The story began in blood. In 70 AD, after years of rebellion, Roman legions crushed Jerusalem. The city was looted, its treasures taken, its temple burned to ash. From that devastation came the riches that funded Rome's greatest monument. Tens of thousands of Jewish slaves were brought to Italy, their chains echoing through the streets as they hauled massive stones, carved arches, and raised the walls that would one day host the most brutal spectacles of the ancient world. At its peak, the Colosseum stood 4 stories high, a ring of gleaming white limestone that could hold over 50,000 people. Inside its corridors, every class of Roman society had its place. The elite sat close to the arena floor, their seats lined with marble. The poor crowded the upper levels, grateful for the free bread and free show that promised an escape from the hunger of daily life. The emperor's box towered above them all, perfectly centered, a symbol that every glance, every cheer, every drop of blood was under his gaze. But the Colosseum was more than a building. It was a message carved into stone. Its very design reflected the order of the empire, a perfect circle that mirrored the Roman ideal of unity and control. Even the engineering was political. The arena could flood for naval battles, open to reveal hidden animals, or shift its floor to display elaborate stages. Every mechanism served one purpose: to awe the crowd and remind them that only Rome could create wonders from death. The phrase, bread and circuses, captured the genius of this system. Feed the people, entertain them, and they will not question you. The emperors understood that power did not always require armies or laws. Sometimes it only required a good show. As the poor cheered and laughed, as their eyes followed the sword and not the Senate, their hunger for justice was replaced with hunger for spectacle. Every brick of the Colosseum was propaganda. Every roar of the crowd was a song of submission. In its shadow, rebellion became impossible. The people had been given something greater than freedom, they had been given distraction. And through that distraction, Rome built its greatest weapon, not of iron or fire, but of illusion. The Colosseum was not just where men died. It was where Rome itself performed its power. They came from every corner of the empire, men torn from their homes, their tribes, their armies. Some were captured in war, dragged across continents in chains. Others were criminals, condemned to die in the sand. But there were also those who stepped forward willingly, men who saw in the arena a strange kind of hope. In Rome, poverty was a prison of its own, and for some, the sword offered freedom. To become a gladiator was to gamble everything for one thing Rome denied the common man: glory. The life of a gladiator began inside the walls of the ludus, the gladiator school. From the outside it looked like a fortress. Inside, it was a world built entirely around pain and endurance. Each day began before dawn. The air was thick with dust and the smell of sweat and metal. Wooden swords struck against shields as men drilled again and again, perfecting their technique. Trainers, many of them former gladiators, watched with cold eyes, correcting mistakes with lashes and blows. Discipline was survival. Hesitation was death. There were different kinds of fighters, each trained in a unique style. The Mirmillo fought with a heavy shield and broad sword, modeled after Rome's own soldiers. The Retiarius carried only a net and trident, quick and unarmored, dancing around his opponent with deadly grace. The Thraex wielded a curved blade and small shield, agile and aggressive. Each style told a story, each match was a performance of skill and personality. The arena was not chaos, it was choreography. Gladiators lived under constant watch. They slept in cells, ate in communal halls, and trained until their bodies broke. But the best of them, the ones who survived the longest, became legends. Crowds learned their names, chanted them, carved them into walls. Merchants sold miniature statues in their likeness. Women of high birth sent them gifts, even love letters. In a society that worshipped strength, they became the idols of the people, heroes born from humiliation. Yet the price of fame was dehumanization. Every gladiator bore a tattoo that branded him as condemned. His name, his freedom, even his body belonged to the owner of the ludus. He could not marry, own property, or refuse combat. To the empire, he was both less than a man and more than one, a living symbol of Rome's power to decide who lived and who died. For the gladiator, every fight was a question of identity. He fought not just to survive, but to be remembered, to prove that his life, however brutal, meant something. In their suffering, Rome found its greatest stars, and in their defiance, its darkest reflection. For the empire that ruled the world was also the empire that demanded blood for beauty and death for entertainment. The morning began with the hunt. As the sun rose over the Colosseum, the gates below opened to reveal cages dragged into the arena. Lions, tigers, and bears from Africa and Asia paced restlessly behind iron bars, their roars echoing through the corridors. The crowd leaned forward, eyes wide with anticipation. Men armed with spears and nets stepped into the sand, dressed not as soldiers but as hunters of legend. When the signal was given, the gates flew open. The beasts charged, and the air filled with the sound of violence. The hunts were called venationes, and they were meant to remind the world that Rome ruled not just over men, but over nature itself. By midday, the sand was stained dark. The next act was the execution. Criminals, rebels, and prisoners of war were brought out to die before the crowd. Some were burned, others torn apart by animals, others forced to reenact famous myths where the ending was always the same. In these stories, the condemned played their roles to the death, dying as Hercules, Prometheus, or Orpheus, their final breaths serving as applause for the empire. Then came the main event, the moment the people had waited for. The trumpets blared. Drums rolled. The gates opened once more, and the gladiators entered. The crowd erupted in thunder. Each man was dressed in ornate armor, painted helmets, gleaming swords, and shields that caught the sunlight like mirrors. Some wore the heavy crested helmets of Roman soldiers, others the curved blades of foreign warriors. Each pairing told a story, Rome versus its enemies, civilization against chaos. The fights were not random. They were designed. Some duels were to the death, others ended when one fighter yielded. The editor, the sponsor of the games, decided who would live and who would die. But the crowd had power too. With a simple gesture of the thumb, they could spare a man or condemn him. Life and death became theater, ruled by the will of 50,000 spectators. Behind the screams and the steel, the games were a performance of politics. Each victory on the sand echoed Rome's victories on the battlefield. Each death reaffirmed the empire's dominance. The arena was not chaos, it was choreography. Every roar of approval was an oath to the emperor, every fallen man a symbol of Rome's glory. The Colosseum was more than a monument of stone. It was a mirror reflecting the empire's heart. In those stands, the people of Rome did not see cruelty. They saw order, justice, and power. And so the sand ran red, not by accident but by design. For in Rome, blood was not just the price of entertainment. It was the proof of civilization itself. In a world ruled by men, where war and politics defined honor, there were women who stepped into the arena to claim it for themselves. The Romans called them gladiatrices, female gladiators, a rare and controversial sight. Their appearances were meant to shock, to amuse, to blur the boundaries of what was proper in a society built on hierarchy. Yet every time they entered the sand, they defied the empire's expectations, transforming from spectacles into symbols of rebellion. Ancient writers recorded their existence with both fascination and disdain. Some mocked them as curiosities, while others admitted their skill rivaled that of their male counterparts. They fought in smaller venues, often at night, their duels illuminated by torchlight and watched by nobles eager for something new. The contrast was intoxicating. To see a woman, bare-armed and armored, wielding a blade in defiance of Roman decorum, was both thrilling and forbidden. For a brief moment, the empire's rigid order trembled. But the Colosseum was not limited by gender or decency. The myths that surrounded it blurred fact and fiction until they became one. There were stories of lovers condemned to fight each other, dying in each other's arms as the crowd roared. Tales of senators stripped of their titles, forced into the arena to face beasts and death as punishment for betrayal. Rumors of emperors demanding nobles fight for sport, not for justice but for amusement. These were not mere entertainment. They were performances of power. Every forbidden fight, every scandalous display, reminded Rome that the emperor could command anyone, from slave to aristocrat, to kneel before the will of the empire. The spectacle no longer belonged to the people, it belonged to power itself. For the gladiatrices, their courage challenged the very foundations of Roman virtue. For the condemned nobles, their humiliation revealed the emperor's absolute rule. And for the spectators, these forbidden spectacles fed both fascination and fear. Because in Rome, even the boundaries of gender, status, and morality could be rewritten by the turn of an imperial thumb. For the rulers of Rome, the games were more than entertainment. They were a language of power, a living performance that declared divine authority to the masses. Within the Colosseum, emperors were not men. They were gods among mortals, orchestrating death with the wave of a hand. When Titus opened the great amphitheater in 80 AD, he promised a spectacle that would echo through eternity. For 100 consecutive days, the sands ran red. Thousands of animals were slaughtered, from lions to elephants, each death a symbol of Rome's dominion over nature. Gladiators fought from sunrise to sunset, and the emperor watched with calm detachment as blood turned the arena floor into mud. To the people, this was generosity beyond measure. To Titus, it was the ultimate display of Rome's wealth and strength, a gift paid for in blood. Then came Caligula, whose madness turned the games into personal vengeance. He summoned senators, nobles, and rivals to the Colosseum, forcing them to watch as their kin were executed. Some, he made fight themselves. For Caligula, the arena was not politics or sport. It was cruelty elevated to ceremony. He saw himself as a living god, one whose laughter could condemn a man to death. The games, once symbolic of Rome's order, became a reflection of its decay. But no emperor blurred the line between ruler and gladiator more completely than Commodus. The son of Marcus Aurelius, once expected to be a philosopher-king, Commodus descended into delusion. Obsessed with the arena, he believed himself the reincarnation of Hercules. He trained with real gladiators, fought on the sands, and demanded to be cheered as conqueror. Of course, the contests were never fair. His opponents fought with blunted weapons or none at all. Every kill was staged, every victory a lie. Yet to the people it was mesmerizing. Their emperor, their god, fighting for their amusement. He even renamed Rome after himself, declaring it Colonia Commodiana, the city of Commodus. For these emperors, blood was not simply shed. It was currency. Each death bought loyalty. Each spectacle silenced unrest. The arena became a throne room where the ruler's power was renewed with every scream from the crowd. The empire's might was no longer proven by conquest abroad, but by the control of life and death at home. The emperors did not just rule Rome. They performed it. The arena was their stage, the gladiators their instruments, and the crowd their chorus. Every game, every execution, every roar of approval reinforced the same message. The emperor's will was law. His pleasure was justice. And through the theater of death, he reminded all of Rome that he alone decided who would live, and who would be erased from history. 50,000 voices. A single heartbeat. The Colosseum was not only a stage for death, it was a stage for the people. When the gates opened and the first gladiator stepped into the light, every eye turned to the sand. The air thickened with tension, the crowd leaning forward as one body. It was not cruelty alone that drove them to cheer, it was something deeper, something human. The Romans believed that violence revealed truth. The arena was not chaos in their eyes, it was order. The gladiator's courage, his defiance in the face of death, reflected the very ideals of Rome itself. Each fight reaffirmed their belief that they were strong, disciplined, and chosen to rule the world. To watch death and not look away was, to them, a mark of civilization. To flinch was weakness. To cheer was pride. For the poor and powerless, the arena offered belonging. In those moments, the divisions of class dissolved. The senator and the slave stood shoulder to shoulder, their voices blending into a single roar that shook the earth. The games promised unity, a shared identity built on dominance and control. Blood was the currency of that unity, proof that Rome still held mastery over life itself. Every victory was theirs, every execution a reaffirmation of their power. The emperor gave them bread, the arena gave them purpose. And as the crowd's cheers rolled across the city, echoing off marble walls and into the heavens, it was as if Rome itself was roaring. The louder the blood spilled, the stronger their belief became. The more violent the spectacle, the more they felt alive. The crowd was not a passive witness to death. They were participants in a sacred ritual of empire, a living pulse that demanded sacrifice. And through their cries, they kept the illusion alive that Rome was eternal, unshakable, and destined to dominate forever. The end came not with a roar, but with silence. As centuries passed, Rome began to change. The old gods who had demanded sacrifice faded into memory, replaced by a new faith that spoke of mercy, compassion, and the sanctity of life. Christianity spread across the empire, and with it came a moral reckoning. The Colosseum, once seen as a temple of glory, began to feel like a grave. Philosophers, bishops, and common citizens alike began to question the bloodshed. Stories spread of Christian martyrs refusing to cheer, of men and women walking out of the arena rather than watching another soul die. Even emperors started to hesitate. The crowd's appetite for violence, once insatiable, slowly dulled. By the early 5th century, Emperor Honorius made the final decree. Gladiatorial combat was banned. The last known games took place in the year 404. Legend tells of a monk named Telemachus who entered the arena to stop the fighting, only to be killed by the angry crowd. His death, it is said, moved the emperor to end the games forever. Whether myth or truth, the message was clear. The age of blood had ended. The Colosseum, once filled with thunder and fire, fell into ruin. Its arches cracked, its seats crumbled, its sands grew cold. 4 centuries, it stood as a silent monument to the empire's former glory and its hidden shame. Yet even as the world moved on, the memory of the games did not die. The spirit of the arena lived on in new forms. Medieval knights fought in tournaments to prove honor and strength. In modern times, the fascination remains in sports, films, and the stories we tell about struggle and victory. The Colosseum may have fallen silent, but its echo still reverberates through time. The hunger for spectacle, the pull of danger, the allure of heroism, all still linger. The Roman arena may be gone, but its shadow remains, woven into the very fabric of human nature. Beneath the roar of the crowd and the glitter of Roman grandeur, there was always something deeper, something darker. The gladiators were not simply warriors or victims, they were the embodiment of a system that celebrated cruelty as a virtue. The arena was more than a place of death. It was Rome itself, reflected in sand and blood. Every fight told two stories. One of strength, heroism, and triumph, the story Rome wanted the world to see. And another, silent and haunting, the story of moral decay hidden behind applause. The empire that once prided itself on civilization had turned death into a pastime. The people who built aqueducts, temples, and cities were now entertained by the breaking of bones and the spilling of blood. What they called discipline had become indifference. What they called glory had become greed. As centuries passed, the games grew more extravagant, more grotesque. The cheers grew louder, but so did the emptiness behind them. The Romans believed they were celebrating life, but they were feeding a hunger that would one day consume their empire from within. Each death in the arena was not just the end of a man, but a small piece of Rome's soul falling away. The empire did not collapse because of the barbarians who stormed its gate. It crumbled because it had already fallen from within. The moral foundations that once held it together had eroded, corroded by spectacle, pride, and the worship of violence. The people who once conquered the world had become prisoners of their own desire for entertainment. Today, the Colosseum stands in ruins, its arches hollow, its floor bare. Tourists walk its corridors in awe, imagining the grandeur it once held. But the stones remember the screams, the cries for mercy, the silence that followed. The Colosseum is not a monument to Rome's greatness. It is a tomb for its conscience. Its message echoes across time. When humanity trades compassion for spectacle, when we glorify suffering and call it art, when we find unity not in empathy but in blood, we repeat the same mistake. The same pattern. The arena may have fallen to dust, but its shadow remains. The true fall of Rome did not begin with invasion. It began with applause. The story of the gladiators is not buried beneath the dust of time. It lives on, reborn in new forms, reshaped for new audiences. The arenas have changed, the weapons replaced by cameras and screens, but the heart of spectacle remains the same. Humanity has always been drawn to conflict, to triumph and defeat, to the drama of survival. The Romans built their Colosseum from stone. We build ours from light. Every cheer, every gasp, every obsession with victory carries the echo of those ancient sands. We are still the crowd, drawn to the edge of violence, fascinated by the courage of those who step into the ring. But the story of the gladiators is more than a memory of blood and empire. It is a reflection, a mirror held up to our own world, asking the same question that haunted Rome. When does entertainment become cruelty? When does admiration become worship? And when does the spectacle consume the soul of the civilization that creates it? The Colosseum still stands, silent but eternal. Its stones whisper a warning that time has not erased. The games may have ended, but their spirit endures, hidden in our desires, waiting for the next arena to open. Because every time we watch, every time we cheer, we step once more onto the sands of history, and become part of the same story that began 2,000 years ago.